June 11, 1942, Tokyo. The Japan Times and Advertiser goes to press with a headline that reads, "Navy scores another epical victory. 4 fleet carriers are at the bottom of the Pacific. Over 3,000 men are dead." The Japanese public will not know this for the rest of the war. This is the story of what happened inside the silence between that headline and the truth. 4 days later, on June 15th, the surviving Japanese fleet crept back to the anchorage at Hashirajima near Hiroshima under strict radio silence and without ceremony. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, riding quietly at anchor. Among them, a conspicuous absence. Where there had been 4 fleet carriers, there was empty water. The sailors who had survived the sinking of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were not permitted to go home. They were quietly separated from the fleet, sworn to silence, and packed off to distant postings far from the civilian population. Their letters would be censored, their conversations monitored. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo would not be informed of the true scope of the disaster for another month. The fleet had come home. Japan told itself it had won. What happened at Midway begins with a conversation in 1941. Before Pearl Harbor, before the first carrier strike, before any of it. In the summer of that year, Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe asked Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto directly, what would happen if Japan went to war with the United States? Yamamoto was 56 years old. He had attended the Naval War College in the United States, served as naval attaché in Washington, and watched American shipyards and factories, an ambition with the careful eye of a man who understood what he was looking at. He was also a gambler, in the literal sense. He played poker and shogi with an intensity that made men uncomfortable. He thought in odds and decisive bets. 2 fingers of his left hand were missing, lost at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, when he was 19 years old and the Japanese Navy destroyed the Russian fleet in an afternoon. He had been paying attention ever since. He gave Konoe an honest answer. "I shall run wild considerably for the first 6 months or a year," he said, "but I have utterly no confidence for the 2nd and 3rd years." He was ordered to fight anyway. Pearl Harbor followed. Then the Indian Ocean, then the Coral Sea. 6 months of running wild, precisely as predicted. Operation M. I was Yamamoto's own design, the plan to lure the American fleet into a decisive engagement near Midway Atoll, roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Oahu. The ambition was total: destroy the remaining American carriers, seize Midway as a forward base, and break American will to continue the fight in the Pacific. On paper, the force assembled was overwhelming. 8 carriers, 11 battleships, 23 cruisers, 65 destroyers, over 200 supporting vessels in total. Yamamoto dispersed that force into 5 separate groups across hundreds of miles of ocean. A configuration built around deception, around concealing the full weight of the Japanese fleet until the Americans had already committed. It was a gambler's plan, built on a gambler's assumption that the Americans, demoralized by 6 months of defeat, would behave predictably. They would not. 3 facts the plan did not account for. The Americans knew not everything, but enough. Signals intelligence had cracked pieces of Japanese communications traffic, and the codebreakers at Pearl Harbor had deduced the target. The USS Yorktown, which Japanese planners believed had been so badly damaged at Coral Sea in May that she was effectively out of action, had been hauled into dry dock at Pearl Harbor and repaired in 72 hours. 3 American carriers would be waiting northeast of Midway, not 2. Every Japanese calculation about force parity was wrong before the first plane was launched. And the man in tactical command of the Japanese striking force, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, and of the Kido Butai, had risen through the destroyer and torpedo tradition of the Japanese Navy. He was technically the most senior officer available, and so he commanded the most sophisticated carrier force in the world. Standing at Yamamoto's side throughout all of this, keeping the diary that would later carry the title Fading Victory, was the Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki. Meticulous, formal, recording everything. The 6-month clock was running. June 4th, 1942, 10:22 in the morning, the Central Pacific northwest of Midway Atoll. The sky's clear, the water is the deep blue of open ocean. Nagumo's carriers sail in tight formation, their wakes white against the dark sea. Below decks on Akagi, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida lies on a stretcher. He led the Pearl Harbor strike, but he was supposed to lead the strike at Midway. Instead, the night before the battle, he was on the operating table. An emergency appendectomy, the scar still fresh. He has come above decks anyway. He cannot stay below. He grips a conduit pipe with both hands and watches. The morning has already been difficult. At 7:15 a.m., believing the American fleet is still in Pearl Harbor, that there are no carriers within range, Nagumo orders his ready aircraft rearmed with bombs for a second strike on Midway's airfields. The planes on Akagi and Kaga are mid-change, torpedoes removed, bombs being loaded, when a scout report arrives at 7:28, 10 enemy surface ships bearing northeast. Nagumo brings the rearming to a halt. The planes are caught between configurations, neither armed for land attack nor for a strike against ships, and torpedoes and bombs sit loose on the hangar deck. Fuel lines run open through the ship. He wants to recover the aircraft already airborne before launching anything else. He is waiting for the moment to be right. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi sees it differently. From the bridge of Hiryu, commanding Carrier Division 2, he sends a message to Nagumo. Strike immediately, with whatever is ready. 16 dive bombers on Soryu, 18 on Hiryu. Strike now, before the opportunity closes. Nagumo hesitates. At 10:22 in the morning, the American dive bombers come through the clouds. The Zeros have been drawn down to low altitude, chasing the torpedo bomber attacks that came first and died in rows. The dive bombers come from above, nearly unopposed, in screaming dives that last only seconds. Fuchida, gripping his conduit pipe. Here's the whistle first. Then the crash, enormous, concussive, as the bombs drive through flight decks loaded with fuel and loose ordnance. Then the secondary explosions, one after another, the stacked munitions cooking off in sequence. Within 6 minutes, Soryu and Kaga are burning from stem to stern. Akagi, struck by a single bomb, burns more slowly, but the fires expand and cannot be controlled. 3 carriers, 6 minutes. Hiryu strikes back, wounds Yorktown, keeps fighting until mid-afternoon, when American dive bombers find her as well. By evening, all 4 carriers are on fire. Fuchida is pulled from Akagi with broken ankles. He will survive to write the most important Japanese account of what he witnessed. For now, he is a man on his back in the smoke, watching the carriers burn above him. The smoke is still rising from 3 carriers when Nagumo's staff finds him on Akagi's bridge. He is standing near the compass, staring out at the flames. 2 carriers burning to port, one burning beneath his feet. His staff presses him. "Transfer the flag, sir. Get off the ship." The light cruiser Nagara is standing by. Nagumo does not move. He mutters 4 words. It's not time yet. Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, Nagumo's chief of staff, the man who had commanded Akagi herself in 1940, who now stands on his old ship as it burns around him, presses harder. The ship is lost. The flag must move. Kusaka speaks quietly and with deliberateness, the way you speak to someone who is not entirely present. Eventually, Nagumo nods. Tears are in his eyes. They leave through the bridge's forward windows by rope. Kusaka, burned and sprained at both ankles, goes down hard. Nagumo, the judo man, lands cleanly. Below, bodies. Above, the sound of expanding fires. On Hiryu, hours later, a different scene. From the bridge, Yamaguchi addresses what remains of his crew. He accepts full responsibility, tells them there will be other ships, other battles. Then he removes his cap. He holds it for a moment. He lets the wind take it. He drinks sake with his flag captain, Tomeo Kaku. The crew departs, the two men stay. Later, Yamamoto would say that Yamaguchi was the one admiral he had hoped would survive to lead the fleet in the battles ahead. The man who saw the right move and was not listened to. June 5th, 1942. Yamaguchi is gone. Kusaka, burned and limping, watches Akagi from the water. He records what he sees. A terrific fire, bodies all over the place. The planes stood tail up, belching livid flames and jet-black smoke. He had commanded that ship. He had stood on that bridge. Now he watches it burn, and he takes notes, because he is the kind of man who takes notes even here. Hundreds of miles to the west, aboard the battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built, bristling with guns that never fired a single shot at Midway, Admiral Yamamoto receives the news by radio. His staff watches as the reports come in. 1 carrier, 2, 3, 4. He understands before the numbers finish arriving. He predicted it in a room with the Prime Minister in 1941. He said 6 months. And now, almost to the day, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the second and third years have begun. He cancels the Midway operation and turns the fleet toward Japan. Then he goes to his cabin. What he thinks there, yet alone while the surviving fleet turns for home. No one recorded that. His staff noted that he said almost nothing for days. He retreated into a stillness that was not grief, not shock, something closer to recognition. The man who predicted this outcome had designed the battle that confirmed his prediction. He had done both of these things, and now he sat with both of them in a cabin on a warship that never fired its guns. He would not be relieved of command. The Imperial Japanese Navy could not remove the architect of Pearl Harbor at the exact moment morale was the only thing left. And so, Yamamoto stayed. The prophet of the second year kept his command into the second year. Somewhere nearby, in the same silence, Ugaki opens his diary and begins to write. Here are the numbers. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Kuhiryu. All 4 had attacked Pearl Harbor. All 4 now rest on the floor of the Pacific. 1 heavy cruiser sunk. 248 carrier aircraft destroyed, most with their ships. Approximately 3,057 men dead. Sailors, pilots, and among them over 700 aircraft technicians and maintenance specialists whose skills had taken years to build and could not be quickly replaced. Against that, the Americans lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, 1 destroyer, and roughly 307 men. The newspapers reported something different. On June 11th, the Japan Times and Advertiser told its readers Japan had scored another epical victory. 2 American carriers sunk, it claimed. 2 Japanese carriers lost. Acknowledged. 10 days later, the state quietly revised this. 2 more carriers could no longer operate due to vaguely specified damage. And the 4 lost carriers were never publicly acknowledged. Not during the war, not once. Yamamoto's Axis partners were also lied to. Germany and Italy were told Japan had won. They adjusted their strategic calculations accordingly. When Italy's position in North Africa later collapsed, partly because the Imperial Japanese Navy could no longer project force into the Indian Ocean to disrupt Allied supply lines, a direct consequence of Midway, Italian commanders explicitly blamed the Japanese. They did not know they had been given fiction. It is in this context that Kusaka arrives at Yamato. He is burned, his ankles are bandaged. He limps. He has come to report the near annihilation of the Kido Butai. And then someone tells him what he did not know. In the days before the battle, The combined fleet headquarters had received signals intelligence suggesting the Americans were not in Pearl Harbor, that they knew Operation MY was coming, that they were at sea and waiting. This intelligence was not relayed to Nagumo. The rationale was radio silence, the need to maintain secrecy. And so Nagumo sailed into the ambush without warning, rearming his planes in the wrong direction while the American carriers sat on the horizon. Kusaka had asked, before the fleet sailed, that Yamato relay all important intelligence to Akagi. He had asked specifically. He had anticipated exactly this situation. The record does not capture what it costs him to stand there on broken ankles and learn this. The fury is recorded. That same month, the Emperor directed his navy to ensure future operations continued bold and aggressive. He had already issued the same directive the morning after the disaster. The system was speaking over all of them. Ugaki keeps writing. His diary records every development with meticulous precision. Written in the immediate aftermath of the worst defeat in the history of the Imperial Japanese Navy, it betrays no hint of self-doubt that the outcome might somehow implicate the Navy's fundamental views of naval strategy. He files the catastrophe as a setback. He keeps writing. The diary is titled Fading Victory. What happened after Midway did not happen quickly. It happened the way a wound spreads, not in one moment, but in every moment that follows. The pilot problem came first. Most of Japan's veteran carrier pilots survived the battle itself. The carriers that trained them and the maintenance crews that kept their planes flying, Han had not. The shortfall was immediate, and the solution made it permanent. Replacement pilots were pushed through abbreviated training and sent to the front before they were ready. The veterans who remained, the men who had been at Pearl Harbor, who had spent 6 months over every ocean Japan had touched, were given no rest. They went back into the Guadalcanal campaign. Over 1942 and into 1943, more than 1,000 Japanese aircraft were lost in the skies over the Solomon Islands. The veterans died faster than they could be replaced. The replacements were not ready. The maintenance specialists who kept those planes airworthy were at the bottom of the Pacific. Kusaka understood this. Rebuilding the doctrine of the reconstituted Third Fleet from what remained, he implemented what he had learned from June 4th. Her carriers would drain their fuel lines when combat was imminent. Dawn searches would go out in 2 waves, covering the gaps that had opened that morning. Strike groups would be spotted on flight decks while searches were underway, ready to launch the moment a contact came in. These were not small changes. They were the specific mechanical failures of Midway corrected in writing, then in practice. He had watched his ship burn. He fixed what he could fix. But doctrine is not strategy. What the fleet could not fix was the thing it refused to name. At the Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942, 4 months after Midway, Japan won. The USS Hornet was sunk. Nagumo commanded the Japanese force, and his side held the field. He acknowledged afterward that it had been a shattering strategic loss for Japan. He knew, he said the words. The attrition of experienced pilots was consuming something irreplaceable. He had looked at the numbers and drawn the correct conclusion. Too late, in the wrong room, for it to change anything. The strategic apparatus around him continued the same patterns. The same logic of dispersal and deception that had scattered Yamamoto's forces at Midway reappeared in the Solomons. It reappeared at the Philippine Sea. It reappeared at Leyte Gulf in 1944, where the Japanese Navy divided itself into multiple forces without unified command, fighting a battle it could not win in a war already decided. Kusaka's tactical manual did not change the thinking of the men who issued orders. Japan had the arithmetic. It could not obtain comprehension. Yamaguchi was already gone. June 5th, 1942. His cap somewhere in the water east of Midway. Yamamoto remained in command. He led the defense of the Solomon Islands and could not prevent their loss. On April 18, 1943, American code breakers intercepted his detailed flight itinerary. An inspection tour of forward bases, his schedule transmitted in enough operational detail to be actionable. P-38 Lightnings were dispatched to meet his transport plane over Bougainville. They found it on time, precisely where the intercept said it would be. The same signals intelligence advantage that had placed American carriers northeast of Midway, waiting for Nagumo's fleet, had now killed the man who sent Nagumo there. The man who predicted the second and third years did not survive to see the third. Nagumo was reassigned. The commands he received after Midway carried a different weight than the one before. In 1944, he was given Saipan. Somewhere in the years between Midway and that island, he sat with his two sons and wept while he talked about June 4th, 1942. The tears that had come to his eyes on the bridge of Akagi, he had carried them for 2 years. On July 6th, 1944, with American forces closing in, he committed suicide. The man who led Japan's greatest carrier victory at Pearl Harbor died on Saipan, the war already decided. Kusaka survived. He reformed what he could reform, trained who he could train, drained the fuel lines and launched the two-wave searches, and wrote it all down. He was the one who had talked Nagumo down from suicide after the battle, who had limped onto Yamamoto on broken ankles, who had watched his own ship burn and taken notes. He lived. Fuchida recovered. He co-authored the most significant Japanese account of the battle, as a work that shaped how the world understood Midway for decades. After the war, he converted to Christianity. He died in 1976, 34 years after gripping a conduit pipe on Akagi's deck. And Ugaki kept writing. His diary ran through the entire war, every operation, every loss, every strategic shift recorded in a meticulous hand. Through the fall of Guadalcanal, through the death of Yamamoto, through the loss of the Marianas, the Philippines, the slow collapse of everything the first 6 months had built. He wrote it all. He drew no fundamental conclusions about what it meant for the Navy's understanding of itself. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. Ugaki read the news. He took his binoculars. He took the small sword that Yamamoto had given him. He boarded a dive bomber, a Comet, and flew south toward the American fleet. Said he was lost at sea. The diary ends there. The last entry is August 15th. After that, nothing. The man who recorded everything, who filed each catastrophe into the next page and kept writing, ran out of pages on the day the war ended. The ships were countable. The men were countable. Japan counted them and then told its people it had won. Its admirals wrote in their diaries and rebuilt their doctrine and ordered boldness and went back to sea. Some of them understood what had happened. Most of them filed it away as a setback, an operational failure on a clear morning in June, rather than the day the future arrived without warning and could not be unsunk. What Yamamoto said when he counted the losses? Almost nothing. He had already said it in 1941 to a prime minister who wasn't listening. Now what Nagumo said, it's not time yet. He was wrong about the ship. He was right about everything else. Fading victory. The Diary of Admiral Matome Ugaki. It ends August 15th, 1945.